This is the fifth Bridging the Gap Leadership Series. This is the fifth Bridging the Gap Leadership Series. And that's significant because we intend to have more, but I can tell you the turnout today at 5 o'clock for Miss Fiorina is absolutely exceptional. So it says a lot about you. So thank you and welcome to Spartanburg, South Carolina. Where is Bill Conley and Alexa Newman? Bill Conley is the chairman of our local party, and Alexa Newman. Where's Alexa? Everyone needs to give them a great big hand. Alexa. We partner with our Republican Party. We are all Republicans, and they are always so gracious to host this wonderful fest. I can tell you today is particularly big because while we have our own Miss Carly Fiorina in Columbia, South Carolina, with the South Carolina House Caucus, so too was another woman on the other side of the ticket whose name I won't mention. And I can tell you the national press for the Republican Party by far outweighed the other, thanks to the great Republican state of South Carolina. All right, we're going to move along because you all are not here to hear me. You are absolutely here to hear Ms. Fiorina. I will tell you the third vice chairman, Taylor Mason of the state party, is here. And I have to call out the former chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party, Barry Wynn, who has truly been my mentor and one of my greatest friends. Barry, stand up. So interestingly, Palladian View was born to empower women because women constitute 53% of the electorate, and yet we disproportionately are represented in elected offices. 5 years ago, we started Palladian View, and we've really morphed because we've learned that 83% of Americans are completely disenfranchised with the political process. And so we're here with one focal point, and that is to bring leadership in the United States of America to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and to hear issues, hopefully get behind candidates. This has been a great seeder for many candidates. And hopefully you all that feel impassioned by Ms. Fiorina, you all will go to her staff afterwards and say, we're aboard, and really lock in and support candidates. That's what this is about. And so I want to thank all of you for being here and to that effect. Great panelists, and I love these guys and gal who've been here from the inception, frankly representing every media market in the upstate. And we'll begin with Alan Smith, who is the CEO of the Spartanburg Area Chamber of Commerce. We really felt that we needed to have a business focus and someone from the business community. Prior to that, he served as president and CEO of the Greater Greer. He's a graduate of East Carolina, and he is truly a rising star across the state, and perhaps one day the United States, as it relates to Chamber of Commerce's and just the passion and energy he has. You all will see today. Beth Brotherton is a reporter with WYFF News 4. She anchors at 4:30 weekdays, grew up in Zambia as a child of a missionary, a fabulously interesting background, studied broadcast journalism at the University of Illinois. Gordon Dill, reporter at WSPA-TV, covered upstate politics for over 15 years, anchors 7 on Your Side, and he always talks about his wife, Beth, and 2 awesome daughters. Ben Hill, anchor on Fox Carolina, served internships with NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams and ABC News Good Morning America, studied journalism and political science at Western Kentucky, and then our very own print media represented today with Michael Smith, who is the executive editor of the Herald Journal and is over newsroom administration and opinion. I have to tell you, I might get myself in trouble, but we also have the publisher of our newspaper here today with his son, and it just warms me when we have that kind of engagement by our community. And Larry Riley, I'm going to ask you to stand up. I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for that, but give us a big stand up. Thank you for being here. And son, stand up. All right, simple format. I'm going to introduce Ms. Fiorina. She's going to come up here. We're going to begin by asking questions. We're doing something brand new. We're a digital magazine online, and we've had so many people say we'd like to ask questions, and this was really born from panelists. But because of your technological background, we today have done a little different. We've got hashtag AskCarlyPV, and people can ask questions. Madison's going to be handing them. They're being sorted randomly. This is completely transparent She'll be handing me questions as they come up over the text, and then periodically I'll bounce one in if it's relevant. So that's kind of where we are. Ms. Fiorina is a passionate, articulate advocate for conservative policies that advance economic growth, entrepreneurship, innovation, and effective leadership. When she was recruited to Hewlett-Packard, she became the first woman to head a Fortune 50 business, taking Hewlett-Packard from 28th to the 11th most profitable company in the U.S. In her 6 years as chairman and CEO, she would double its revenues to $90 billion. That's tremendous, ladies and gentlemen. More than quadrupling its growth to 9%, tripling the rate of innovation to 11 patents a day, achieving market leadership in every market and product category, and quadrupled cash flow. And for those of you that own businesses, those statistics are absolutely out of the chart, and that's a great testament to you. She currently serves as chairman of American Conservation Union Foundation, which annually hosts CPAC, chairman of Good 360, the world's largest product philanthropic organization, and chairman of Opportunity International, the largest nonprofit microfinance lender in the world, giving out $6 billion at an average of $150 per loan, lifting millions out of poverty. In 2014, Carly launched the Unlocking Potential Project, a new pact armed at engaging women and voters and refuting the false notion that conservative ideas and principles amount to a war on women. The UP project's grassroots efforts aided Republicans to win in crucial elections across the country from Iowa to Colorado. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give a great big Spartanburg welcome to Carly Fiorina.
Well, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be with you this afternoon in Spartanburg, and thank you for coming out on a lovely summer day. I will keep my opening remarks very short because we want to get to the main event here, which are the questions. But I have to just reflect on something you said in that very generous introduction. It was indeed true that today Hillary Clinton and I were both in Columbia at the same time. Now, we had planned our trip to South Carolina many weeks ago. It's been publicly known that I would be in South Carolina for several weeks, and Hillary Clinton apparently notified the press a couple days ago that she also would be in South Carolina. And so this was an opportunity. Every time that I am at any event, we have it open to the press, as is this one. Since I launched my campaign, I've probably answered 430 questions. I think she's answered at this juncture perhaps less than 20 since April. And while we all get kind of caught up in the game of politics, and the media certainly gets caught up in the game of politics, I was reminded today while I was speaking to the media about how important, how serious politics in this nation really are. I got engaged in politics when I realized that politics and politicians and the policies that politicians pursue impact everyone's lives, for better or for worse, whether people are engaged or not. It was also mentioned that 83% of the American people feel disengaged in some way or another from the political process. And you see that in a lot of different polls, but recently in a Fox News poll, fully 82% of the American people believe that the professional political class is more interested in preserving its power and privilege than it is in doing the business of the American people and doing what's right for the country. That's a tragic place our country has come to. And it's a tragic place particularly when we are facing so many important issues. I think people feel deep disquiet about what's going on in this country and around the world. I think people are disquieted because they believe that we're losing the sense of limitless possibility that has always defined this nation, that we always believed would infuse our lives, that would infuse our children's and our grandchildren's lives. We're now, for the first time in U.S. history, destroying more businesses than we're creating, and it's the small businesses that are getting crushed. We're tangling people's lives up in webs of dependence, and of course, around the world we see that when America doesn't lead, the world is a more tragic and a more dangerous place. And so I think it's worth contemplating as we have this conversation today about very important issues in our political process. What are the core things? What are the core principles, the core values that have always defined this nation? Because that's what I think this election is about in 2016. So let me mention just a few. And I will start with something my mother said to me when I was a little girl, 8 years old probably, in Sunday school. She said, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." And I know that it's only possible in this country that a young woman would start out as a secretary. I typed and filed and answered the phones for a 9-person real estate firm. It's only possible here that that young woman can go on to become the chief executive of the largest technology company in the world and run for the presidency of the United States. And it's possible here because our founders knew what my mother taught me. Our founders knew everybody has God-given gifts. Our founders knew what I have learned over and over and over again in my life, that everyone has potential regardless of their circumstances, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they look like. Everyone has potential. And our founders built a nation on a visionary idea, radical at the time, that in this country, everyone has the right to fulfill their potential. And that right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness comes from God and should not be taken away by man or government. We have come to a place in our nation's history where the weight, the power, the cost, the complexity, the corruption, the ineptitude of our federal government is in fact crushing the potential of this nation. And so we should remember that here in this nation, leadership is about unlocking potential in others. You see, I think that's another principle our founders knew and that I have learned many times over, that leadership has nothing to do with power or title or position. The highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. The highest calling of leadership is to challenge the status quo, not manage within it, not settle for it when it isn't working anymore. The highest calling of leadership is to challenge the status quo so that people can live lives filled with possibilities. And that too, I think, is what is at stake in this election. What's another principle that this country was founded on? Not that we should have a professional political class. When did we settle for that idea? That only people who have been in politics their entire lives can serve this nation. In fact, for much of our nation's history, we believed that this was intended to be a citizen government, by, for, and of the people. And that people would come from private life and serve for a time, and then return to private life. And so as I think about what this election is about, I think it's worth remembering what Franklin Roosevelt said about the office of the presidency. Because people who are running for president, a lot of them think about the big title they'll have. Politicians give a lot of big speeches. But Franklin Roosevelt reminded us that the office of the presidency is preeminently a position of moral leadership. And I think we need to return moral leadership to the White House. We need to return leadership to the White House that understands its highest calling, and we need to return to a citizen government once again, because it cannot be the case that 82% of the American people have disconnected from politics because they think a professional political class is so focused on itself that they cannot focus on the needs and the opportunities for the American people. Finally, I would say that we talk a lot in politics about what it takes to win the job. And it's a big contest in politics. But I think we also ought to consider what it takes to do the job, because the job needs doing now. And my own view, the reason I have stepped forward is because I believe it takes someone who understands how the economy actually works. It takes an understanding of how the world works and who's in the world and how the people of the world think about us and what they seek from us. I think it takes someone who understands bureaucracies, because our government has become one giant, bloated, unaccountable bureaucracy that has turned in on itself and forgets who it is here to serve and who is paying for it. I think it takes someone who understands technology, because technology is a tool that can be used to re-engage people in the process of their government, and we can talk a little bit about that, as well as a tool to change the order of things for the better. And finally, I think it takes leadership. The kind of leadership that understands it is not about the title. It is not about the position. It is about the highest calling of leadership to unlock the potential of this nation. And sometimes leaders need to make tough calls in tough times with high stakes for which they are prepared to stand and be held accountable. With that, I will turn it over to the Inquisition here. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
So Jan has some time cards, and the reason we're doing this is we have learned that there is a cadence that happens. The faster you go, actually the funner it gets for the audience, and I think watching you, this is absolutely your forte, so this is going to be great fun. We're going to begin with the Chamber CEO, Alan, and just ask away. And we've got about 3 minutes, and our goal is to get through as many questions as we possibly can, and then we'll take some hashtag AskCarlyPV questions when they're appropriate. Madison's going to be helping with that. All right.
Well, first of all, welcome to Spartanburg. I know you've been to some other communities in South Carolina. You've seen the rest. Welcome to the best. You know, it wasn't too many years ago that 80 American lives were lost to seize a city in Iraq called Ramadi. That same city yesterday fell to ISIS. What do we do to combat and eliminate ISIS?
So the first thing that I would do is, instead of holding a Camp David summit with our Arab allies to convince them to support a very bad Iranian deal, I would hold a Camp David summit with our Arab allies to ask them how we can support them in this fight against ISIS, because they know this is their fight, and they are prepared to fight it, but only if we will lead and support them. Let me give you a few very specific things. Examples of things we have been asked to do by our allies and we have not done. Number one, we must arm the Kurds. For 3 years, this administration has been telling us we cannot arm the Kurds because the weaponry needs to go through the central government in Baghdad. The truth is, there is no central government in Baghdad anymore. Baghdad is overly influenced by Iran. The Kurds represent the best fighting force in the Middle East. We need to arm the Kurds. Secondly, do you remember when the Jordanian pilot was burned alive? King Abdullah of Jordan, a man I have known for many years, King Abdullah of Jordan was here in this country. Remember, he flew back to Jordan. He promptly executed 2 convicted terrorists and started bombing the next day. The man is a leader. He understood that act required a reaction of strength and resolve. He was here asking us for bombs and materiel for his Air Force. We still have not provided them, and the word is he is going to China to get it now. What a tragedy. Saudi Arabia, a longtime Arab ally, knows this is their fight, but they no longer trust us because we have not been resolute in this fight. And so when they begin bombing in Yemen, they give us 30 minutes notice. That means they don't trust us anymore. Their king, in a grand gesture, refuses to show up in Camp David. That means they no longer trust us. That's a bad thing. The Egyptians have a very brave president, a pious Muslim, who stepped forward and bombed when 21 Coptic Christians were beheaded on the beaches of Egypt. But he did more than that. He went into the heart of Cairo. He addressed the major imams, and he said to them what must be said. There is a cancer in the heart of Islam, and only Muslims can root it out. And for this, our president, instead of standing with him, said, we can neither condemn nor condone his actions. President Sisi of Egypt has asked for something very specific as well. Share intelligence with us, please, so that we know how to push back against ISIS. We have done none of that. I have spent a lot of time in the Arab Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, in Jordan. I know these people, and these people understand this is their fight, but they will not fight unless they sense leadership and support from the United States of America.
in our introduction, South Carolina has a female governor, but we've never had a female senator. We've only had one female congresswoman. We have a disproportionately small number of women in the state house. Why don't more women run for office? And at what point is it going to stop being a novelty to have a woman running for office?
And we've never had a woman president, I'm just saying. So the Unlocking Potential project that was mentioned in the introduction, Unlocking Potential was an effort on my part and my team's part to build a ground game among women to get them re-engaged in the political process. And specifically, we went to talk to women in 5 states, North Carolina, Virginia, New Hampshire, Colorado, and Iowa, women who were registered to vote, but who had not voted. And we wanted to understand, why have you disengaged? And it was interesting the answers we got. Women said to us, you know, I'm tired of it. It just all sounds the same. I'm tired of the vitriol. I'm tired of the judgment. I'm tired of the anger. I'm tired of the sound bites. I'm tired of the fact that problems never seem to be resolved. We just argue about them all the time. The truth is, a lot of these people who disengage, women included, it's not that they don't care. It's they think they don't count. And so one of the things that I think is so necessary now in our political process is to stop talking in sound bites and start talking like people talk, in common sense terms. Start being straightforward about our answers, not hedge our bets about what we believe, but be straightforward about what we believe. I also think that we need to recognize, you know, I believe that human potential, God-given gifts, that every single individual has regardless of their circumstances. Human potential is the only limitless resource we have, and it is the only resource we need to solve every problem, to capture every opportunity. It's not that women are better than men. It's that women represent half the potential of this nation. So if we want our nation to be the best it can be, if we want to solve the problems in front of us, if we want to take advantage of all the opportunities we have, then we must fully engage everyone's human potential, men's and women's alike.
Given how many cell phones are in use here, we're streaming this on a cell phone. This past week, the Senate was debating bulk data collection from cell phones by the National Security Agency. The Republican majority leader says that that's an essential part of national security to find terrorists. Other Republicans, like Rand Paul, say that is both inappropriate and illegal. What do you think, and where do we draw the line?
So I think first the process that we're going through now on Capitol Hill is an example of why people get tired of politics. How long have we known that the Patriot Act is going to be up for renewal? This isn't a news flash that we're coming up to a deadline here. I think we have known about this date for about 4 years. And it seems so often that we suddenly get serious about discussing an issue when the deadline is right on top of us. And of course, what happens when a deadline is right on top of anyone? You lose the time to have serious reflection. You lose the time to have calm deliberation. You lose the time to have the conversation that leads to common ground. And so I think it would be helpful if sometimes we would start to debate and discuss these serious issues well before we knew we had a deadline. Point one. Point two, I had the great privilege of chairing the advisory board for the Central Intelligence Agency. I advised several secretaries of defense. I've done work with the NSA. And what I have always advised our covert agencies is this: the American people cannot support something they don't understand. And so it is vital, especially with covert missions, that there is as much transparency as is absolutely possible. No, you don't want to give away sources and methods. No, you don't want to put anyone in harm's way. But we need to have a
common sense conversation with the American people about why, for example, Section 215 is really necessary. Why is it necessary? What is it we seek from that data? Why can we not get it from anywhere else? I think there would be more support if people understood it. Third, my own view is that when you are doing bulk data collection, it takes a lot of time to search through that data and find patterns. And so I personally do not understand or support the argument that says we don't have time to get the judge's warrant. We don't have time to have a third party look over the legality of this. That doesn't make sense to me, knowing what I know about the analyzation of bulk data. I don't particularly support the solution that says, let's just let the telephone companies do what the government used to do. I don't think that particularly solves the problem. And finally, while Edward Snowden revealed a lot of information that caused this debate to become public in what was probably healthy in all respects, just to be clear, I think Edward Snowden is a traitor and should be tried for treason.
It's interesting. I think this is the process we're going to be following. Madison just handed this to me. So I guess that we're receiving, and this is all again live, we're receiving tweets, and when they're appropriate, I'm going to do a follow-up question. And Blake from Spartanburg says, exactly what is your position on Patriot Act? Would you vote up or down?
At this point, I would vote down, but the reason I hate these hypotheticals is because we should have taken advantage of the opportunity to modify it appropriately. And so here we come screeching to the end with up or down. We're not serving the American people when we fail to take advantage of an opportunity over a 4-year period of time to really assess what is necessary, what is not, what have we learned since 9/11, how has technology changed since 9/11. It's a false choice, and I'm not in the Senate, so I don't have to make that choice.
Thank you. Ben.
Welcome to the Upstate, firstly, and thanks again for your time tonight. One core conservative business principle seems to be deregulation, letting American businesses operate as they so choose with little to none, no government intervention. However, just a few days ago, we have a proposed merger of Time Warner Cable, the third largest cable company, and Charter Communications, the second largest. With these large mergers, it seems to be sometimes great. Can you guys hear me okay? It seems to be great for the higher-ups in the company, the CEOs, the presidents, but sometimes not only bad for the workers who may lose their jobs, could be bad for the American public. What sort of protection could you offer American workers as companies seem to, in order to cut costs, ship jobs overseas to make their margins better? What would you say to the American worker?
Wow, that was a big mouthful of a whole set of things. So first, let me just say, I reject the view that businesses are asking for little or no regulation. In truth, we have such a regulatory morass that has grown up over 40 years in this country. But the reality is, all of that regulation, all of that complicated 70,000-page tax code has created crony capitalism. The reason I say that is, when you have a big, powerful, complicated set of regulatory schemes and tax codes and political offices, guess who are the only people who can handle it? The big, the powerful, the costly, the well-connected, the wealthy. As a CEO of a $90 billion company, I could hire accountants and lawyers and lobbyists to deal with whatever Washington threw my way. The 9-person real estate firm, they can't handle it. The family-owned auto body shop that my husband started out in as a tow truck driver, they can't handle it either. And so now, for the first time in U.S. history, we are destroying more businesses than we are creating. And it's not the big businesses that are getting destroyed, it is the little businesses, the family-owned businesses, the small businesses. It matters, because those small businesses, community-based businesses, create 2/3 of new jobs and employ half the people. So when people talk about big business needs more big government to keep them under control, the truth is only big business can handle big government. And the way we have to level the playing field is to start to peel back some of this, not to the point where there is no regulation, but to the point where big businesses can't take advantage of complicated regulation in order to crush the small. Every piece of legislation that has been rolled out there has caused a consolidation in the industry and the destruction of the small players. So, Dodd-Frank, 10 banks too big to fail became 5. 3,000 community banks went out of business. 400 pages of regulation over the internet. Big companies helped write that. Google, Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, and it will absolutely slow innovation on the internet for all the little guys. Here is another big difference between business and government. And it's a huge difference that politicians forget about all the time. Customers, shareholders, employees, communities have ways to hold businesses accountable. I'm not saying every business is honest, they're not, but they don't get away with it for very long. I'm not saying every business is good, it's not. But customers have choices. They can buy from somewhere else. Investors have choices. They can put their money somewhere else. Guess what? Citizens have no choices. They only have one federal government. And when that federal government is corrupt, they don't have a choice. If we want to stop shipping jobs overseas, then we need to understand what your governor right here in South Carolina understands. You have to fight for every job. That is what Nikki Haley is doing here. It is what we have to do in the United States of America. We have to fight for every job. And that means we can't any longer have the highest tax rate in the world. We cannot have a regulatory morass that businesses can't get through unless they're huge and powerful with lots of lobbying might in Washington, D.C. That's what we need to do.
You said that you're running on your record as a business leader. Introduction. Karen noted that when you were president of CEO of HP, the revenues doubled after the Compaq merger. But the net earnings went down from $3.1 billion the year you took over to $2.4 billion the year you left. Doesn't that undermine that record?
No, and I would quibble with the data, but it doesn't matter. The good thing about business is that the results are clear. You don't we file income statements every 3 months, but never mind. Let's take your numbers just for a moment. In truth, the net margin of the business improved dramatically in that time frame. It's important to remember that the 6-year period in which I managed Hewlett-Packard was also during the worst technology recession in 25 years. I managed through the dot-com bust, post 9/11. If you looked at the technology market, you would find that every technology company's stock was down. Every technology company went through a tough time, and we went through a tough time as well. And yet, despite those tough times, we actually improved the profitability of every single product segment and every business line, which is why I don't want to argue with you about your numbers, but if you go back and look, you'll see that every product line's margins improved, our cash flow improved, our market share improved, our market position improved, our rate of innovation improved, and yes, our revenues doubled. To do that in a difficult period requires sometimes some very tough choices. No one likes tough choices. There is nothing harder for the leader of a business to say that fewer people can work here. And so we made very sure that every single employee who had to be laid off in that very difficult time got industry-leading benefit packages, got great retirement programs. But sometimes, a leader has to make tough choices to make sure that the overall institution is protected, which in the end is the job of a leader.
Start with Beth.
Okay.
Sorry, Beth, it's all yours. We're going to do round robin.
Since we're talking about Hewlett-Packard, let me follow up with one of the other questions I had. You were very publicly celebrated as the first woman to take over a major corporation. and then very publicly let go. What does that teach you about yourself, your resolve, your confidence coming back from that? Does it create new fears? Does it create new determination? What do you learn about yourself in the process?
Well, you put it nicely. I was fired.
I was gonna say that, but it felt really rude. Yeah.
It's not rude. I've been very open about it for a long, long time. I was fired in a boardroom brawl that lasted about 2 weeks. And you know what it taught me? Something that I knew before I started at Hewlett-Packard. When you challenge the status quo, you make enemies. That's just a fact. It is a leader's job to challenge the status quo. One of the reasons that so many people choose to manage within the status quo instead of challenging the status quo is because you do make enemies. It's hard. There is nothing more powerful than the status quo, because people who have been successful within the system, whatever it is, a business system, a political system, the people who've been successful within the system fight to preserve their power. And so if you're going to challenge that system, you challenge their power and you make enemies. So it wasn't exactly a new lesson, but it was a really public lesson. And I have to say that I was totally unprepared for the amount of press that I got when I came into Hewlett-Packard. You know, I will have to say honestly that starting out as a secretary, I never had a plan to become a CEO. I just learned that I liked challenge, and I would run to a problem. And every time I ran to a problem, I would find people who knew how to solve the problem. It's just they'd never been asked. And so we would focus their potential on a common goal and a worthy purpose, and we would solve problems. I've been underestimated most of my life. And so when I came to Hewlett-Packard, I wasn't thinking about being the first woman. I was thinking about trying to do the right job for a great company that I thought, and everyone else thought as well, needed to be transformed from a laggard back into a leader. Sometimes getting fired is the price of leadership.
Since you mentioned Governor Haley fighting for every job, in your words, I wonder, the national unemployment rate fell from 5.5% to 5.4%. There are only 2 states in the nation with an unemployment rate higher than South Carolina. We stayed put. It was announced today at 6.7%. Why is a pro-business environment like the one that Governor Haley is trying to create failing to create jobs in South Carolina?
Well, of course, the truth is that there are a lot of intricacies in how those numbers are created. You know the old saying? You've heard the old saying, liars figure and figures lie. Well, one of the dirty little secrets, and you all know this, obviously, about the employment rates or the unemployment rates is it very much depends on who's looking for work and who's participating in the labor force. And we now have nationally the lowest labor participation rates since the late 70s. That means people have stopped looking for work. That's a bad thing, not a good thing. We also know that we now have 100 million people, a third of our nation, on government-sponsored food programs. That's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. We know that there are millions and millions of people who may be working and counted in the 6.5 or the 5.5, but the truth is they're working in a part-time job. They'd rather be working more hours, but they can't find more hours. And so I think it's far better not to look at unemployment rates. You know, every time the unemployment rate goes down, we also find out that the number of people looking for work has gone down. They are positively correlated. I think what's a far more telling measure of the economy is how many jobs are actually being created. And there's no doubt that here in South Carolina, more jobs are being created now than several years ago, just as it is true that in the nation, more jobs are being created now than was true at the height of the financial crisis. That's a good thing. On the other hand, to say that we're doing as well as we can when we're growing at 2%, when we have the lowest labor participation rates in 40 years, when we have too many people saying this isn't the job I want, I'd rather have another one, we're not doing as well as we could or we should. We're not
unlocking the potential of every American. So I think there are a lot of companies who have moved to this state who have said very publicly, we're here because of the policies that have been put in place in this state, and your legislature and your governor deserve credit for that, and yet there is always more to do here and more to do throughout the nation as well. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you about education. I think parties from both aisles, Democrats, Republicans, can agree we've got to do something about education. Now, there are different approaches. You have come out against Common Core. Admittedly, it's not very popular. If you could, though, offer your solution to bring America back up, because within the world, we don't rank very well. What could we do to improve our education system here in this country?
Well, let's start with some fundamentals. It's such an important question because we know that getting an education is one of the single most important determinants of a person's ability to use their gifts and to have a successful life. So if you finish high school, for example, you are far more likely to be successful in life. If you avoid having a child out of wedlock, you are even more likely to have a successful life. So let's start with some fundamental facts. The Department of Education has gotten bigger and bigger for 40 years. It gets more money every year. And yet, our education isn't getting any better, which just goes to prove that it's not necessarily how much money you're spending. It's where you spend it, and how you spend it, and on what you spend it. Secondly, what's the fundamental thing that we all know? We all know this as parents or teachers or brothers and sisters. We know, or students ourselves, what are the two most important things in a child's education? A good teacher and a committed parent. Growing the Department of Education does neither. To put a good teacher in front of the classroom or a committed parent. And so what I believe we need to do is make sure that parents, every parent, has the maximum number of choices possible as to how their child is going to get educated. Is it a parochial school? Is it a charter school? Is it a voucher program? Is it homeschooling? We should also have as many choices as possible in higher education. This government under President Obama is reducing the number of choices in higher education. They are federalizing the student loan program so that borrowing money for a college education is more expensive, not less expensive. And what you'll see liberals doing over and over and over again is reducing a parent's choice. If you doubt that, think about Mayor Bill de Blasio. You know, he runs for the mayor's office in New York by promising to end charter schools and stop the voucher programs. And who is it who marches across the bridge in protest? Not rich moms from the Upper East Side. These were families, lower income families, African American and Hispanic families, who knew that if government took away their choices, they were taking away their children's chances. So. And two last points on this. Number one, I think Common Core is a bad idea because however it started, it has turned into a Washington-based bureaucratic program that is trying to standardize how teachers teach and how students learn. And by the way, it's written by testing companies and textbook companies, a little bit of crony capitalism thrown in here, and it doesn't actually help. But we need to call it like it is. The teachers' union is on the wrong side of this issue. And if you doubt that, not teachers, the teachers' unions, who are seeking to preserve their own power. If you doubt that, remember what the head of the teachers' union in Chicago said when they were striking against Mayor Rahm Emanuel. The issue was teacher accountability. And the head of that union said this: we cannot be held accountable for the performance of students in our classroom because too many of them are poor and come from broken families. So in other words, what she's saying is, if you're poor and you come from a broken family, we can't teach you, you can't learn, and you have no choices. I do not believe that, and neither do you.
radical simplification of the tax code. What would that radically simplified tax code look like?
So let me just start with a design principle. I've called for the radical simplification of the tax code because when you have a 70,000-page tax code, only the big, the wealthy, the powerful, and the well-connected can deal with it, because only they have enough resources to hire the accountants and the lawyers. So just in the last couple days, I've had small business owners come up to me and say, you know what, I couldn't file my tax returns on time because I don't understand them anymore. And my accountant doesn't understand them anymore. And by the way, I can't get anybody at the IRS to answer the phone. And now we learn the IRS had a major data breach and personal information has been stolen by criminals. I would start with the design principle that says lower every rate, close every loophole. Lower every rate, close every loophole. Now there may be one or two loopholes that really do help the middle class or disadvantaged families, but the truth is most loopholes advantage big companies, they advantage the wealthy, they advantage the well-connected. So I would start with the principle, let's have none, and then we could send, put back into the code if really necessary one or two, instead of all of the many we have in that 70,000-page tax code. I would start with one other principle as well, and I think this is really important. We talk a lot, in the Republican Party as well, honestly, about revenue-neutral tax reform. We should have revenue-reducing tax reform. The federal government spends too much money.
The elephant in the room that no one really wants to talk about is $18 trillion in debt. And when politicians like Paul Ryan offer pragmatic solutions to that issue in terms of Social Security reform, Medicare, Medicaid reform, ads are released of him pushing grandma over the cliff. How, as a politician, I mean, arguably that's one of our greatest issues. How do you address it without being victimized and I guess attacked like others before have been?
Let me start by saying that in any other organization in the world besides the federal government, you start by prioritizing. One of the reasons I think it's so important that we go to zero-based budgeting is so that we know where our money is being spent and we can prioritize. But honestly, this is the truth. There are lots of good ideas for how to reform Social Security. But why is it that while we all talk, politicians talk, you're right, about reforming entitlements, they argue about it, why is it that year after year after year, we get reports that tell us that there are hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud, waste, abuse, corruption in the federal government, and nothing happens? Why is it that every 6 months or so we get yet another Inspector General's report that tells us that you can sit in a federal government job, you can watch pornography all day long and earn the same pay, pension, and benefits as somebody trying to do a good job, and nothing happens? So honestly, as a set of priorities, what I would start with is let us get after the fraud, waste, abuse, corruption that we know exists in the federal government. Let's go to a pay-for-performance system so that we can actually fire people who are not doing their jobs. And they don't earn their pay, pension, and benefits for watching porn all day long or for targeting conservatives at the IRS or any other number of horribles. Let's deal with that. Because honestly speaking, until we deal with that, the American people do not trust their government to reform Social Security. Before we get the federal government's house in order, why should the federal government say to the American citizenry, you know what, you've paid into this system all this time, but we're running out of money, and so we need to start taking money away from you. And by the way, the good news is when we start to simplify government, when we start to prioritize our spending so that we can reduce the overall level of spending, when we start to get after pay for performance, when we do those things, when we radically simplify the tax code or we cut through the regulatory thicket, when we do those things, we also lift the weight off of the economy. So there are only two ways to reduce our federal debts and deficits: grow the economy, reduce spending. Grow the economy, reduce spending. Those are the only two things we can do. The good news is if we reduce spending, we also help to grow the economy.
So I have a question from Janice. Sorry, I have a question from Janice. What is your plan for reducing the national debt? And it's a bit of a follow-up.
It's Janice who asked that question? Yes, so as I was saying, I don't want to be too repetitive, but I think in order to reduce the federal debt, we have to reduce federal spending and we have to grow the economy. That's what it takes. There are no other magic bullets. That's it. Reduce the federal spending and grow the economy. The good news is they are two sides of the same coin. So when I talk about things like zero-based budgeting, needing to know where our money is being spent, let me give you a very current example. Today, over the last 6 months on Capitol Hill, the argument has been about sequestration. And we need a strong military, but in order to lift the sequestration, we're going to grow the debt. This is a classic example of needing to prioritize. In the Department of Defense, there is something called the tooth-to-tail ratio. You have a lot of proud military families in South Carolina. You know that military morale today is as bad as it's been in a long time for a lot of reasons. Because we're not caring for our veterans. Because moms are having to ship to their sons or daughters in harm's way blankets and sheets and MRE. We're not caring for people. Tooth is described in the Department of Defense as fighting men and women, materiel, support, the tip of the spear. We have to have the strongest military on the face of the planet, and everyone has to know it. Which means we need to invest in the tooth. But the Department of Defense has measured this tooth-to-tail ratio. What's tail? Tail is bureaucracy in the Pentagon, in Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia. And today, the tooth-to-tail ratio is as bad as it has ever been. And so here's the truth. We need to invest in tooth, and we need to reform the tail. We need to do both. And it's just too blunt an instrument. It's not good leadership to say, well, the only thing we can consider is either a 10% cut or a 10% increase. We maybe need a 25% increase in the tooth and a 30% cut in the tail. That's called prioritizing your spending, reimagining government, and it takes leadership.
For your applause today. This is from a viewer of ours named Tyler in Spartanburg, who asks, should the federal government get out of the business of regulating medical marijuana in states where it has been approved by voters?
Well, look, I believe in states' rights. And so I believe that Colorado has the right to legalize marijuana. But if you ask my personal opinion, I think it's a really bad idea. I think it's a really bad idea because I think we're misleading people. We're describing marijuana as, just like a beer. It's not. I'm a cancer survivor. And I remember when I was first diagnosed with cancer, my doctor said, do you have any interest in medicinal marijuana? I said, no, I don't. They said, that's a very good thing. Because we don't understand marijuana anymore. It's a very complex chemical compound now. We don't understand how it interacts with other medicines. We don't understand the impact it has. And interestingly, if you know anyone who's ever had a bone marrow or a transplant of any kind, an organ transplant of any kind, what you'll find is the medical community now tells someone you cannot have a transplant of any kind if you have had a trace of marijuana in your system for 30 days. What does that tell you? And so I think we've walked into an area here where somehow kids are being told that it's just like having a beer. It's no big deal. We have no idea how to deal with folks who are high at work or high while they're driving. So I think we're going to go through a difficult set of lessons here. I support the voters' rights to decide that. But when young people ask my opinion, I say I am not in favor of legal marijuana. And if you truly want to use it as a medicine, then regulate it like a medicine, so people understand the dangers.
Currently, we're seeing record drought in California, while simultaneously now we're seeing record flooding in parts of Texas and Oklahoma. Terrible situation in both states. A lot of Democrats and liberals would point to climate change and say, that's all you need to see. Republicans obviously would disagree. I know your stance is you don't believe in the theory of climate change. What would you argue against Democrats if you're in a debate with Hillary Clinton regarding climate change?
Well, actually, that's not the position that I've taken. The position that I've taken is, let's take the scientists at their word. First of all, it's clearly climate change, right? The climate is changing. But let's take the scientists at their word. See, what the liberals and the Democrats never tell you is the fine print. And here's what the fine print of all those same scientists says. A single nation acting alone can make no difference at all. In order with current technology to have any impact on climate change or global warming or whatever they want to call it, the only way with current technology to have any impact at all is a concerted global effort over decades costing trillions of dollars. So why would we shoot ourselves in the head and the foot, eliminate jobs, just to make a point? California is a classic example. California has had droughts for millennia. It's a serious thing when you have a drought. But knowing that California has always had droughts, what have the liberal environmentalists in California done? While the population of the state has doubled over the last 40 years, the environmentalists have prevented the building of a single new water reservoir or a single new water conveyance system. So while the population has doubled and droughts come and go, 70% of the rainfall washes out to sea. And then you'd think if you knew you had droughts, you'd be saving water for a rainy day, wouldn't you? That would make sense, but no. And then in the late 90s, those same liberal environmentalists said, you know what, we're a little worried about this fish called a smelt in the Delta, and so we're going to start managing the water of California from Washington, D.C., and we're going to tell the farmers in the Central Valley how much water they have. And if you have ever traveled through the Central Valley, and I have, you will see acres of devastation, absolute devastation. And it's not just the fields that have been destroyed. It's people's lives and livelihoods. You look at the coal plants that are being shut down. I've been to these coal mining communities. These are proud communities and proud families, and we are destroying their jobs. And we're saying we can't build the Keystone XL pipeline, even though that pipeline is better for greenhouse gas emissions than the way we're transporting oil now. What is this all about? Unfortunately, it's not about the science. Unfortunately, it's about liberals' willingness to sacrifice other people's lives and livelihoods at the altar of their ideology. If we want to tackle this problem, the answer is innovation, not regulation. And why should we deny hardworking Americans the ability to earn a living just to make a point?
You've said that you favor a path to citizenship for the millions of illegal immigrants in this country. What's your plan to getting to that point and for immigration reform? And what are the preconditions for that to happen?
I actually have not said that. I've been very public in saying three things on immigration. Number one, we have to secure the border. The northern border and the southern. This is a place where people lose faith in their government. How long has the border been insecure? A long time. Under both Republicans and Democrats, there's a lot of talk about it, but the truth is it isn't secure. The truth is it's not rocket science to secure a border. And the truth is that as long as our border remains insecure, the problem gets worse. Our enemies know our border is insecure, and all kinds of bad things come across that border. There's an industry now of young Chinese women who get pregnant, come across our border, have their children here. There is a new heroin addiction problem in New Hampshire because of the heroin that flows in over the northern border. We have to secure the border. Secondly, talk about managing within the status quo. How long has our legal immigration system been broken? 25 years.
We have 16 different visa programs. Most of the people who are here illegally came on a legal visa, overstayed, and nobody did anything about it. We don't have an employer verification system that works. We need to fix the legal immigration system. But to your point of those who have come here illegally and stayed here illegally, my view is actually they don't get to earn the privilege of citizenship. Perhaps they can earn legal status someday. Perhaps their children can become citizens. But I know too many people, and so do you, I know too many people who have worked hard to earn the privilege of citizenship. They have played by the rules. They have studied our history. They have taken the oath. They have raised their hand. And it isn't fair. It just isn't fair to say to those
Alan.
In economic development, we talk about the need for infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, but there's a need for human infrastructure as well. And we have a silver tsunami coming. In the next 5 to 10 years, it's projected that 25% of the American workforce will retire. What are your plans to address our workforce challenges?
Well, it's a great question, as these all are, because to your point, as important as it is to rebuild our infrastructure, it is equally important to retrain our workforce. But let's just pause for a moment on that silver tsunami, because the silver tsunami represents a great opportunity in the federal government. We're going to have tens of thousands of federal government employees retire in the next 5 or 6 years. It's a window of opportunity, because we can either choose not to replace them, which will be an opportunity to reimagine government and reduce its size and its power and its complexity. Or current course and speed, they'll all just get replaced, because no one is willing to challenge the status quo. We need to take advantage of this opportunity, because if we replace every single one of those retirees from the federal government, then it's going to take us another 25 years to have this opportunity again. In the meantime, however, you're absolutely right, and this is why we need more choices in terms of education, not fewer. President Obama always says everyone should get a college education. Maybe that's true, but a lot of people need technical training. A lot of people need vocational training. A lot of people don't want a college degree, but they do want a livelihood that will allow them to raise their families and live lives of dignity and purpose and meaning. And so we need more educational choices in this country. Why is it? Why is it that this administration has been going after for-profit colleges? Why is it that we don't have enough support in communities? And by the way, I think in South Carolina you have some great programs where local businesses and local community colleges collaborate together and say, what is it? What are the skills that we need to give to workers or retrain workers with so that they can go out and get the next job? We can fix this problem, but we're not going to fix this problem if the federal government decides that it is its job to decide what's a good education and what's not a good education. We're not going to fix it if the federal government decides we're going to nationalize the student loan program. By the way, that is what's happened. While President Obama talks about student debt as a problem, and it is a problem, remember that the student loan industry has been nationalized. And now we have the federal government deciding who should get a student loan, and they decide the rates at which those loans are provided. And guess what? The rates that students are paying on those loans are a heck of a lot higher than the rate the government pays on its own debt. Is that fair? No. We need competition in education, we need competition in student loans, and we need all kinds of educational choices to retrain the workforce, but it does require collaboration between local governments, in particular state governments, community colleges, and businesses.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're right at an hour, and I'm not sure if you were paying really close attention, but you heard Carly say that she had answered over 400. Today she's answered an additional 20 questions in Spartanburg, South Carolina. We are awfully privileged to have you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the panel as well. Thank you.
so much.